On va commencer. Alors, on est ravis de vous accueillir ce soir pour cette masterclass, donc, qui a pour thème Prostitution, l'enfer dépasse. On accueille et on est ravis d'accueillir Rachel Moran, qui est une survivante de la prostitution et une autrice féministe. Donc, pour vous faire une petite introduction sur Rachel, tout d'abord. Donc, c'est une survivante de la prostitution irlandaise qui a été contrainte de se prostituer à l'âge de 14 ans. Et elle raconte dans son livre l'oppression qu'elle a endurée, ainsi que les conséquences psychotraumatiques auxquelles elle a fait face. Elle a réussi à sortir du système prostitutionnel à 22 ans et elle se consacre depuis à l'écriture. Donc, dans cette perspective-là, elle a écrit un livre qui s'appelle L'enfer dépasse, qui vient d'être traduit et publié en français aux éditions Livre. Donc, on vous invite vraiment à acheter son livre et à soutenir les autrices survivantes de la prostitution qui ont beaucoup de choses à dire, on le sait, et donc vraiment écouter les survivantes. Donc, ce soir, on est ravis d'accueillir Rachel Moran pour la présentation de ce livre et puis plus largement de son expérience en tant que survivante, de son expérience en tant que féministe, abolitionniste, militante de la prostitution également. Et donc, pour l'animation de la masterclass, on est ravis également d'accueillir Yamour, donc des Radical Girls, membre des Radical Girls, qui va aujourd'hui animer. Donc, merci Yamour, et je te laisse la parole pour la suite. Juste une petite précision. Donc, évidemment, nous, on est Osez le Féminisme. On est une association, comme vous le savez, qui existe dans toute la France. On organise des masterclass, des tables rondes, on essaye tous les mois. Le mois de novembre sera consacré, comme c'est le cas depuis plusieurs années, à la lutte abolitionniste, parce que c'est des violences qui sont souvent tues, mises de côté dans les luttes contre les violences sexistes et sexuelles. Et donc, nous, en tant qu'association abolitionniste, c'est une valeur auquel on tient beaucoup. On souhaite mettre en avant les luttes abolitionnistes durant le mois de novembre, à l'occasion du 25 novembre, journée de lutte contre les violences masculines à l'égard des femmes. Et donc, tout au long du mois, on va faire une campagne sur les réseaux sociaux sur la pornographie notamment, mais c'est en lien avec la prostitution, on le sait, et d'ailleurs on va en parler ce soir. Et on continue à travers ce type d'événements comme ce qu'on fait ce soir, à mettre en avant la lutte abolitionniste. Donc suivez-nous sur les réseaux sociaux. N'hésitez pas aussi à adhérer si vous ne l'avez pas déjà fait pour l'année 2022, parce que là, l'adhésion, à partir dès maintenant, l'adhésion est valable jusqu'à fin 2022. Donc, vous pouvez d'ores et déjà vous adhérer sur le site de l'association. Également, vous pouvez faire des dons. En plus, on sait, il y a bientôt les déclarations fiscales qui arrivent, donc c'est déductible à 66% des impôts, c'est toujours utile. Et pour nous, c'est très, très utile. Donc, voilà, je ne vous embête pas plus et je vous laisse en compagnie de Yamour et Rachel Moran, qu'on est ravis d'accueillir. Welcome, Rachel and Yamour. Thank you for accepting our invitation tonight, and I'll let you go on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So good evening, Rachel. Thank you again for being here. I just wanted to start slowly. Can you tell us a little bit about your book, your story, your experience of prostitution for those that don't know you?
I was 14 when I was made homeless in Dublin. That was in the spring of 1990. And it was in the summer of the following year that I got involved in prostitution here in Dublin. And I spent 7 years involved in that life before getting out at 22. So, you know, I'm 45 now, so that was quite some time ago. And in about two years later, I had gotten to the point where I think there's a period for every woman, and it will be different for every woman, of extreme sort of numbness, like a healing process where she just needs to lick her wounds. It would be like the psychological equivalent of the very bad sting that you feel after you've suffered a physical impact wound. And for me, that lasted about 2 years before I began the process of looking around the world to see what it was potentially that I could do or be or involve myself in that would be positive. And I went back to adult education at that point. I was 24 at the time.
Okay, sorry, I had a little breaking at some point. And how? So it's something that you explain, of course, in the book really well. But what was, so after the period of numbing, what was the thing that made you wake up? And then in turn at 22, what was the breaking point that made you click and made you say that you needed to exit prostitution?
Well, there was never a single moment when I really clicked, if that's kind of, if what you mean is, was there a dawn in realization in one particular moment? That realization was 7 years long. You know, I always knew that I had to get out of this and get away from this. It was just that there came like a confluence of different circumstances all together at the same time, when I knew that I had to make that something happen in my life. And as a mother, and I'm sure a lot of us listening are mothers, we can understand that your child is the central focal point of everything. For me, that was huge, but it was also the fact that I was still so very young, and I was, I think I was withering, if you know what I mean, on a lot of different levels at the same time, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. And it's a terrible thing to be able to say that you're withering as a person. I remember feeling that way very, very deeply in one particular day when I was just kind of thinking and feeling. I was 19 years of age at the time, and it struck me. I remember that so clearly because it struck me. You're not even out of your teens. So it felt so strange to feel like I was 90 years of age when I was 19. So it was all of that really that came together.
I have this numbness feeling. Maybe it's something in the presentation of Ursula. Something that struck me is how she had highlighted the fact that you've worked on trauma, and a lot of it, and how the experience of prostitution, the sort of numbness it induces, a little.
I'm sorry, we're having some trouble with the connection here. You broke up a little bit. You were what were you saying about trauma?
So Emma is having a bit of trouble with her connection, so we're gonna pass on for a while to Laetitia.
Okay.
2 seconds.
Okay. Sorry for the inconvenience. So I think we were at the part of where you were presenting your work in your book. Can you tell us, you told us a little bit about your story. Now about the book, in how many languages was your book translated in, and what does it mean to you?
It's been translated into German, Italian, Korean. I'm terrified I'm going to miss one of them. I feel so guilty if I do. German, Italian, Korean, and now French. And I have a very bad feeling that I've forgotten one. If I have, I'm sure it'll come back to me. When the book has been published, like in German, for example, it was made available in the German-speaking countries and so forth, and it was published in several English-speaking countries as well. So it's up at about 14 or 15 countries now, which is fantastic. And I'm delighted that it's finally going out in French. My only regret about the French edition is that it didn't come in time to be able to lend its support to the passing of the French law. But as it turned out, you didn't need me for that one anyway. So I'm a huge fan of the French law. I think you've done the best interpretation of the law that criminalizes demand that we've yet seen. And that's yours is the law that I advise governments to follow and to adopt and to replicate. So I'm really thrilled that the French edition is finally going out now.
Hi, I'm sorry. I'm back
again. Yeah,
not today, but I think I got right in time for you were talking about the translation. I'm glad you mentioned that. About the French law, that you like it so much. You didn't make it on time for the passing of the law, but what's interesting is that you made it on time for one of the strongest challenges to the law. So the viewers might know this, but maybe I'll remind it anyway. So there were groups such as Médecins du Monde and Strass, who is a notorious pro-prostitution group, that have challenged the French law, the abolitionist model on prostitution, first at the Constitution, and they failed to prove it was unconstitutional. And now they are challenging it at the European Court of Human Rights. So what does it mean to have it out now when it's challenged at the highest level possible?
Well, that's certainly good timing, yeah, more. So I guess, maybe it's just as well in the long run. The one thing that I'm proud of about that book is that I know that it has the power to change minds, because I've had so many people from so many different cultures, countries, totally unknown to each other, tell me that it was the thing that changed their mind. So I think that it's very important in that respect. People often ask me to talk about this issue, and I sometimes wonder how much more I can possibly say, because but your thinking does go on and change and grow and evolve. There are things that I would change now, not radically, but differently, some of them in the text of that book. And I've written about those things in the foreword, actually, of the French edition. But I think by and large, I'll certainly stand over it. And I know that I can't think of anything else that I could hope to put under the noses of the people who are in positions of decision-making power in France.
It is really a page turner. I remember it reads in just a few days. I think it's the power of the book. It makes it this difficult topic accessible. It has the experience and the analysis that goes with it. Something else I wanted to ask about that is, so you've mentioned some things you would change, and also what more can I say? And it's funny because you've been talking a lot since the publication of the book, and you've even, founded an organization, Space International, and you continue your activism. So what I like about the book is that we see the first part of your life, and now we see the rest unfold in front of our eyes. So what was your journey after prostitution and after the publication of the book?
Well, there was I got out of prostitution in the summer of '98, and I signed the book deal in the summer of 2012. So there were 14 years in the difference. that was a long time. It was a long time. It was long enough for me to have moved on enough to be able to take this on. I'd educated myself. I'd gotten myself secure in several different practical ways. Secure home, secure job, secure, I had my education and all that. And of course, my son was late teens at that point. So I felt also that he could take it and carry it. It wasn't as if I was imposing this on, a 10-year-old child. So I went ahead and I did that, and I did it for years. And I spent the first 4 or 5 years of my activism devoted fully and wholly to this issue, uncompensated, unpaid, unsalaried, all of that, because it mattered that much to me, And then the organization that I had founded a few years previously, we became, we got our 501c3 in the United States, and we became a formal charitable organization. And so we were able then to draw down funding and to organize in a more kind of structured way, because prior to that, it had been very much, it really was, pulled together through the goodwill of the feminist movement. I couldn't tell you the amount of sofas that we slept on, spare rooms, budget price flights, and, all of that. And we just plowed along. And in the time that we did that work, we shifted legislation, helped to shift legislation and public opinion in numerous nations. So that's where, this has all brought me now to the point where the tail end of 2021, I've put in 10 years or more now in the women's movement. It's difficult to say when, to pinpoint an actual moment when this all began, because it happened in kind of steps and stages. I spent the last half of 2010 and all of 2011 just tinkering around with my memoir, pulling it together, editing it. And I'd come across in around mid-2011 the writings of several women, not very many, but they were key women, and they were important texts to read. And I read Catherine McKinnon and Sheila Jeffries and Kathleen Barry, and I read their points and positions on prostitution. I'm very glad that I was guided in that direction, because being guided in the opposite one would have just been too much to bear, reading that kind of nonsense. But anyway, I was comforted then to see that there was a body of work there already. And I drew some of that work into my own in the form of quotations and, because there were some very important points that I wanted people to be able to come across in my own work and kind of provide touchstones back to the work of other women. So that was really useful. And then when the book came out, then finally, that was in April of 2013. After years, but I'd been blogging for over a year at that point, about 14 months. And I didn't find out until quite a while afterwards that blog had been shared by many, many women, including all of the ones that I had been reading. I didn't know that at the time. So it happened in steps and stages, and it was a very invigorating time, and especially up to the spring of 2017, at the point when we got the law in Ireland finally. That was hitting a milestone, that all of this had been so, worthwhile for, if you can understand what I mean by that.
So you've mentioned the body of work was useful for you, and you're lucky you stumbled upon this body of work and not the pro-prostitution one. but we know how much, how many attacks feminists face these days and how many books are removed from shelves. So I was wondering, did you receive any specific backlash? And do you think you would have been able to publish it today the same way you did back then?
Well, first of all, the backlash that I received is of a level that very few people actually understand the full depths of it, because there are some things that I'm not at liberty to say, because they would involve third parties who I wouldn't want to get them into any kind of trouble or discomfort. But it was huge. It was enormous. The backlash was so enormous, and it went on for so long, 8 years in total, that I had to eventually take a defamation case here in Dublin. And I won my case. And it was deemed offensive, untrue, and defamatory. The claims that were at the center of all of this bullying and harassment. And those claims were that I was a liar and a fantasist and a fake and a fraud, and that I had never lived prostitution at all. So yeah, I finally got there in the end, but it cost me a lot more than I can even say in terms of profile pieces in very, very reputable media outfits and establishments. I have no way of not knowing, and I'll never know what it's cost me in revenue. Because when you lose opportunities like that, it has a financial roll-on effect that, of course, I cannot calculate. I think, it cost me more than I understood at the time in terms of my mental and emotional health, because I spent 8 years telling myself, oh, I don't care what's said about me. I couldn't give a damn. And I believed that in large part. But on the day when I finally found the legal team who agreed to take on my case, because I had been through 4 legal teams before I finally found it, I walked into the centre of Stephen's Green Park, which is a beautiful park in Dublin City. And I sat down looking at the ducks, and I just cried my eyes out. And I really do think that women who take on this work, we don't understand what we're walking into. We don't understand how forceful the backlash is going to be. We cannot calculate the level of contempt that will be served up to deal with. We don't have any way of measuring the distance that's going to be forced between ourselves and our sense of peace. And I could go on and on about those things. One of the reasons why I'm feeling emotional thinking about the aftermath and the backlash and the way that you're treated and what that feels like is because it's only been 24 hours since I found out that one of our sisters in Italy took her own life because of very similar circumstances. So I would just like to say that out loud so that we can remember Adelina. I never met her personally, but it's always such a loss when this happens.
No, my condolences for this. And I did see the public statement from the Italian organization, Resistenza Femminista. I invite viewers to have a look. We'll share the link. Talking about backlash, I remember your last, not your last, but the launch of your book in Italy was not easy at all. And I think it's worth mentioning because you're coming to Paris next week or in 2 weeks' time, and we're really excited about it. And we certainly hope that it won't be the same way, but maybe to give us an idea. So you said we don't understand what we're walking into, to give an idea of how dangerous it is. Can you tell us what happened? Because it's incredible.
Well, to me, the Italian thing was just amusing. We ended up just laughing about it afterwards and calling it the Italian job and this kind of, you know. There were a couple of public protests, one in particular where people were roaring and shouting and waving signs, and they had come in to deliberately disrupt the event. So they were all sitting there very well behaved until 10, 15 minutes into the event when they all erupted in the same moment and started roaring and shouting. But it just goes to show the illogic at the heart of these behaviors, because one woman rushed up towards the stage where I was sitting and she shoved a sign in my face and she started shouting, "Don't judge me, don't judge me." And I took the microphone because I can't remember who I had to take it from, but I took it from somebody and I put it up to my mouth and I said, "I don't judge you, I judge the men." And I can't imagine why. You see, it just goes to show how little she had listened. She could never have listened to a word I said. She could have never read an article or a blog post. She certainly had never read my book. That's what she believed, that I was there to judge her. It's crazy.
And why? Oh, sorry.
No, sorry, Yamor. I was just going to say, when I say that we don't know what we're walking into, I'm not really referring to events like that, although, you know, that's not pleasant. But I don't find that kind of thing rattling. And I don't even find being lied about particularly rattling either, because I expect that. What I find rattling is when people believe it. That's what's upsetting to me, when people start to back away from you because they believe, not necessarily that you're a liar and a fraud and all of that, but that they believe that the fact that you're being lied about, that there may even be an inkling of a truth in it somewhere, will adversely affect them. And so they back away to protect their own reputations. And here, Yamor, is where I was so naive back 9-10 years ago. When these rumors all first started, I thought that they were too absurd to take seriously. I just assumed that nobody would take that seriously. It was too ridiculous. What woman would step out into the full public view and put the hooer stamp on her own forehead if it didn't belong there? That's what I was thinking. But as it turned out in the end, it didn't matter what people believed. It only mattered what they might suspect or what they might think. Even if there was a sniff of a potential within it, that was enough to make some people treat me very, very badly. And it has been, let me see now, 2 years this month. It's been 2 years this month now since I won that case. It was very widely publicized, the results of the case, especially in Ireland and Britain. And I have not had one single apology from one single person, not one time, nobody. Of all of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who were involved in that smear campaign, not one of them has approached me publicly or privately. And that just shows you the caliber of people you're dealing with. So that's really what I'm talking about when I talk about the cesspit that we're walking into.
I have so many questions. I'll go in order. The caliber. Something I've noticed in people who support prostitution, sometimes naively, is that they think pro-prostitution groups are grassroots, just small movements. But you've mentioned the caliber. So who is behind those movements?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. When George Soros's Open Society Foundation announced a few years ago that he was making an $18 billion grant via his Open Society Foundation, I had women calling me in tears saying it's over. You know, we may as well just hang up our boots and go home. If people think that this is a little small cluster of grassroots, trade union organized and minded women, they haven't a clue what they're talking about. No kind of clue. These are enormous. The funding on the table here is bigger than most people would ever imagine. They're highly funded, highly organized, highly professional groups. Many of them are slick enough and sly enough to actually present themselves as anti-trafficking groups, right? Mm. So they're supposed to be here protecting and providing for trafficking victims, while at the same time, their entire agenda from the moment that they were writing up their organization's mission statement is to press for the full decriminalization of pimping. So it's an absolute rat's nest. And you will have events every couple of years, like one that happened in Vienna a few years ago, a friend of mine attended, where you'll have 200 and 300 pro-prostitution lobby academics from all across the world turning up to attend. You know, there's a lot of wisdom in that old phrase, follow the money, because the same groups that are funding these groups to attend this conference are the same groups who are funding the research that these academics are producing, which, surprise, surprise, proves that there's no harm to be found at all within the sex trade, and it's all a happy, clappy, wonderful situation reminiscent of something straight out of Pretty Woman. Pretty Woman with class, you know, hotels and apartments and, you know, street corners here, you know, all of that. And on and on and on. It's like, it's a very incestuous kind of circle, because you've got your, I mean, for example, and I haven't got the photographs to prove this, and if I had, I would have sent them on to you so that you could upload them, which would leave me free to name the individuals involved. But I know of parties that have happened in pimps' back gardens, you know, lovely lunch parties where the pimps are gathered sipping champagne along with the academics, along with the funders. People have no clue what's really going on here. And the sad and scary and frustrating thing for us is that for every dollar we've got, they've got hundreds of thousands. And, but you know, my message to you now is the same message I gave to the women who called me a few years ago when that funding was released. It's that you can't buy the truth. You cannot put a dollar amount on the truth. It's not for sale, and they can't buy it. And we've got that in our corner.
And why do people not believe you? Because you said earlier about the rumors, you thought no one will believe them. And you're telling your story. Your story is not believed. The rumors are believed. You're telling about these fundings, and actually pretty much anyone can go up and look on the website of the Global Network of Sex Work Projects and see the funding. Everything is crystal clear, but yet people do not believe. Why?
I think they don't want to. I just think they don't want to. I think that it would explode the cultural narrative. And I think there's a lot of different layers to that. I think that a lot of women don't want to believe that this is as big as it is, or as scary and intimidating as it is, because then they'd have to accept that it has the potential to be intimidating to them too. And that prostitution is an arena of life that is just waiting for them, like a shark with its mouth open, should they be unfortunate enough for the tide of their own lives to turn direction. It's an intimidating presence in the world for women, and I think a lot of women don't want to look at that. And I also think that there's a complacency. And And I think it's a very natural complacency, and it's taken me a while to come to terms with that. In the same way that I don't spend a lot of time obsessing, worrying, stressing myself out about cancer research, for example. But if somebody I love very much, very close to me, got cancer tomorrow, or if I did, all of a sudden that would become something that would interest me more than it ever has. And prostitution is not dissimilar to that in one important respect. It's that if something is not real and present in your life in front of your face right now, just the fact that it's a potential threat is not enough to catch most people's attention.
It's like this Damocles sword all above our heads, and we just don't want to look up, and we just keep the chin
keep the head down.
Yeah, keep the head down. So keeping the head down, I'll go back to something else you've said. It reminds me of what you said during the attacks you've received. So this campaign you've had against you, and you thought, I don't care, it's fine, I'll be able to deal with this. And it reminds me again of something that women in prostitution say, women in domestic violence say, women in lots of difficult situations say, I will cope, I will be fine, it's okay. So this complacency, this I will be fine. I mean, it's something that's current in prostitution. What's interesting, it's also what you've, in the book, you talk about the fact that when you were in there, you also, it's a lie you told yourself, but also to a journalist when you were really young, and you told her, no, it's my choice, I'm doing this. Why do you do it? How do you often see it? Can you explain this mechanism to maybe women who do not realize it and who do not know about it?
What I'd said to the journalist, she'd asked me, did I not care what people thought of me? And I told her my exact words were, no, I couldn't give a shite. And for anybody who doesn't understand that vulgarism, the word shite in Ireland, it's an Irish pronunciation for the English word shit. So I was telling her that I couldn't care less, basically, which was an absolute lie. And the reason for that, more was, had I told her the truth, I would have had to follow that truth along to its furthest conclusion. I couldn't possibly tell her, yes, I care very much. And you know, when I'm standing there on the corner, I have to feel like a piece of nothing. How could I possibly say that to her when I had to turn on my heel and walk back down to that same corner that same night and stand there feeling like a piece of nothing? Now that I had revealed that emotionally, how much more difficult would the experience have been? And I could see, of course, in hindsight, what I was doing and the way that I was protecting myself. And, you know, it took me a while to kind of learn to forgive myself for that. It took me, I guess, to understand really and fully why I was dishonest with her. Because there's a difference, you know, between setting out to tell an untruth and being unwilling to tell a painful truth. I mean, they're different things. And a lot of what you'll find in women in the sex trade today is that same kind of self-protective mechanisms going on all over the place. I spoke once in, I think it was Brussels. It was a fairly major event. And there were a few women sitting near the front in the first couple of rows, and they got up. It was pretty sure it was, but they were speaking in French, I believe, and they were shouting. They were very angry. I could have picked them out of the crowd just by eye, you know, because after that many years in prostitution, they were older women. That certain look, I mean, when you've been bullied and brutalized that hard for that long, you develop a vulnerability in your eyes. I would notice it a mile away. But anyway, the point is that I didn't even speak their same language, but I could hear in the tonality of their voices, the anger, the fear, the despair. I didn't need a translator. I knew that they were saying in their own way, irrespective of what words they were using, you can't take this away from me. This is all I've got. And that is another very strong feeling that underpins these arguments, especially the longer a woman's been involved, the more forcefully she will feel that.
As always, you have to find the right words, the strength to follow that truth, to having to follow that truth if you admit it to yourself. I was just wondering, checking the time as well here, if some questions from the audience maybe you're still so I know some have been asked. So there's a question if you're coming to Lyon to promote the book. So apart from having to lose.
Yeah, I am. I actually got the schedule earlier on today. Do you want me to have a look?
Yes,
I can do that if I can pull this up. Hold on. I've just minimized the screen here.
And I'll collect any more questions if there are. So yes, we're very sorry about that. I'm sorry, everything has been a bit delayed. Oh, there are also requests about Spain. So everyone wants about your Rachel tour. Up.
Well, if anybody can put me on to any Spanish publishing houses, I found a wonderful Spanish translator. Okay. So now it's just about finding the publishing house. So if anybody has any ideas or any contacts, just feel free, get in touch and let me know about it. I'm just going through, oh, there it is. I'll just run through the list. So Paris for a few nights, then Lyon, November 17th, Montpellier on Thursday 18th, Toulouse on the 19th, back to Paris on the 20th, and then Brussels on the 22nd, and then home.
Okay, long tour. So good luck with that. So we've had a few cities. So there's an open call for Spanish publishers. This is for the viewers. And then I assume you would be also interested in South America. You have an option. I think somebody's willing to find you a publisher there.
What we're hoping to do is find a Spanish publisher with South American distribution links.
Okay,
so
okay.
Deal with the two at the same time would make life so much easier. And it'd be great to give the women a dig out in South America.
Okay, so that's something that I think can be, hopefully you'll receive some emails after this webinar. There's a question about pornography. So I think the question is about something you've said also. If people were connected to you, somehow their reputation would also be damaged. And there's something, so this was from Ursula's observation, that prostitution still, despite everything, has this sort of gloomy reputation, whereas pornography is completely embedded in pop culture and entirely normalized. You talk about pornography as well a little bit, and it's something you've mentioned in other webinars later on in your life of activism. Can you tell us about the links between the two, prostitution and pornography?
I'm actually writing about that at the moment, and I still have thoughts that I need to tease out for myself. You asked earlier on about the differences. I think it was like if I was to write paid for again, what would I change? One of the things I would change is that I would have I would have written a much more extensive, I would have devoted a few chapters, at least probably several, to pornography instead of the one chapter that I devoted to porn in the book, because I feel it's a very big, broad issue. And with every year that passes, it's becoming bigger and broader and more damaging and more dangerous and more deeply culturally embedded. And, you know, there's nothing new going on here. I mean, I remember, and this really proves to me that the imagery that we see reflected out into pop culture is, it goes straight into the minds of children and young people, as it is designed to do. I remember when I was actually walking down my first red light street, having this mental imagery of like Madonna in Desperately Seeking Susan, you know, very snazzy, very, you know, sexualized, but there was a fusion of the concept of sex and power in that film, because you see, we didn't see Madonna, Susan, being smacked around the place. We didn't see her being throttled or being brutalized in any other physical or sexual way. What we saw was her kind of wearing her sexuality as if it were an outfit. And we understood the concept of her being imbued with some sort of power by way of this, you know, wearing of her sexuality, the very public display of how she perceived her own sexual self. And I do not for a moment believe it's a coincidence that that went through my mind on my way down there, as I was saying to myself, if you can be just strong enough to do this. Because in my own mind, there was a fusion between her expression of sexuality and the concept of female strength and power. So if I picked up on that from what I was seeing on MTV and the occasional film in the late 80s and early 90s, I can only imagine what young women are up against now, with these messages being constantly, with no let up, pumped at them night, noon, and morning from their smartphones, which are on their physical selves, you know, in their handbags all day, every day of their lives. There's no getting away from it for them, is the point that I'm making. And I think that that's the end point, you know, of pornography culturally, in the way that it slams right up against young people. Unfortunately, it's not the end point at all in terms of where pornography is taking us as a society. We haven't got anywhere near there yet, and I hope we never do.
Yes, hopefully, but it's true. We're completely surrounded. Oh, here's another question. How did you manage to gather up enough courage to write a book about your story?
By knowing that the only alternative was to entertain a deathbed regret. There was only one thing more fear producing than writing that book, and that was not writing
it. You always have the way to just someone who's bring me to silence me, which is an incredible talent. I don't know if there are any other questions from the audience. I'm sorry, I'm managing.
Yeah, I wanna just elaborate on the question I had before. So yeah, what I was trying to say is that basically the image that we have of prostitution in pop culture is still pretty negative. It's still viewed as violence, perceived as if a woman is subject to prostitution, she is a victim of violence, she more likely has a pimp. That still is going on in pop culture, whereas pornography is seen as a career and as a cool career. It's cool to do pornography. It's cool to talk about pornography. It's cool to make jokes about pornography. And how does that happen when pornography is basically prostitution filmed? And the link is not made in the minds of people. They still see prostitution as that sad story, whereas pornography is a story of success. And that, I guess, is one of the big challenges that we have when we're trying to advocate against pornography, because we're on the start, not cool. You know what I mean? If we criticize pornography, well, we are these old Catholic women, you know, and that's the image that they have of activists against pornography.
The question that you're asking me to answer has at least 20 different answers. And I'm only beginning to tease them out for myself. What I'm hoping is that I'll be able to have answered a good, reasonable number or to have delivered a good, reasonable number of those answers in this next book. Because I don't think it's any one thing at all. I think it's like a layer cake. I think there's lots of reasons. I think one of those reasons is it's safer to look at prostitution as being this ominous area of reality, because you very rarely encounter it. You know, if you're a woman moving through the world, especially if you're a middle-class professional woman, you don't encounter that. You don't move up against it. But you know damn good and well that 90+% of men use pornography on a regular basis. So you know you're rubbing up against porn users when you meet men most of the time, which is all of the time. So they're two very different caliber of situations to confront. One of them is easy to put in a box. The other one is everywhere you look. So what are you going to do, really? Are you going to say, this is horrible, it's dreadful, it's a social pollutant, it's destroying our world, it's destroying our lives, which is the truth? Or are you going to look the other way and call people prudes and come out with this nonsense about whether or not, you know, women are just enjoying their sexuality and being liberated and open with their sexuality, and so on and so forth, and all of this nonsense, and looking and pointing the entire conversation in the wrong direction, which it always is, irrespective whether we're talking about pornography or prostitution, because in all of these conversations that happen in the mainstream, they're talking about the women. They're almost never talking about the men. So I think that's just one answer, but I think that there's many more, and I think we need to work hard to uncover them. But thank you for the question, because it's good to be it's good to be refocused and to be brought back to what is the central points, you know, because if we don't unpick those, then everything else we do is for nothing.
There's a question a little bit related to that from the audience. One of them is, if you ever met a customer, a punter, who changed his mind about prostitution, and then the person added on to that, to complement that question, I would like to know if, for her, so for you, there's a future for pornography in actual society and the direction it should take.
Was that finished? And what direction it should take?
Yes.
Well, I'll answer the second question first. I think we need to start dismantling what's turned into a monster before we start thinking about how to go about building a safer, socially acceptable version. You know, first of all, as I'm sure a lot of you know, the term pornography has its origins in Latin, and it means the graphic depiction of whores. So if we're to go with the original definition of the term, well then no, on that basis, there can be no such thing as a socially healthy pornography. But if what the question really means is, can there be a pleasurable type of visually stimulating sexuality? Well, I guess there's a lot of different kind of answers to that. I mean, my first thing would be to say that sexuality is supposed to be participatory. Where did anybody get the idea that it was supposed to be entertainment to begin with? And maybe that's where this thing came off the tracks, by not according sexuality its own nature in the first place. So that's where I think the real work is to be done. It is always following where we've gone wrong. When we know we've gone very far wrong as a society, retracing our steps and trying to see where was the wrong turn. And I think there may have been the wrong turn in according sexuality and nature, not of its own.
And about the punter, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. The first question. I met two actually in my life, and I know another woman, good friend of mine, who met one. You know, I know women who are what I would call purists, you know, feminist purists, who would say that, you know, no man should ever be given the time of day or, you know, breathe the free air, you know. I find that, you know, exhausting, that attitude, because what it means is interpreted in the way that I interpret it on a spiritual level. What it really means is you've gone so far down this wrong road, be it 1 step or 1,000 steps, you've gone down this wrong road. So that means you must stay on it. There will be no turning back, and there will be no redemption. And I can't live with that message. It's too heavy. It's the mentality, I think, of somebody who didn't have any hope left for the world, you know, certainly not for the individual. And on the other side of that coin, yeah, Moran, I'm not one of these happy clappy, oh, let's all give the men a hug and move forward into this wonderful new reality. That's not me either. Believe
We know
that. I just need to believe that we have the right to turn back, you know. Otherwise, what are we here for? What is the point, you know? And yes, I have met a couple of men like that. One of them in particular contacted me because he'd read a blog post that I'd written years ago. And it was a very, very sad situation. He got in touch with me because he had picked up a 15-year-old girl on the same street that I'd been on as a 15-year-old girl. And she had asked him to drop her to a bus stop. She'd asked him, first of all, to drop her wherever she was going, and he had said no. And then she'd asked him to drop her at the bus stop so she could get the bus there. And he also said no. And he just left her back where he found her. He couldn't have been bothered to drive her anywhere. Once he'd used her, he'd had enough for goodbye, get out, you know, that was the attitude. And he picked up the newspaper about a month later and she died of hypothermia. She was homeless. So, not that same night now, you know, a few weeks later, but that's irrelevant. The point is she was a homeless young girl and he hadn't even been able to bother to bring her to one place where she might have had a bit of heat and a bit of comfort for the night. He hadn't known she was homeless, but that was also irrelevant. And he came to talk to me at a public meeting. I went outside to have a cigarette and I heard these footfall behind me and I spun around and I knew it was him before I even turned around because he'd been sitting in the second front row acting real fidgety. And look, you have a sense for these things, you know, after X amount of years. And I knew that he was behaving in such a manner that he had come there for a purpose. He hadn't just come to listen like everybody else. So when I turned around, I wasn't one bit surprised to see him. And then we got into the conversation. So I tell you all that to say that this haunts some men, you know, this really, really haunts some men. And I say that not to say, oh, the poor men, and not to say, oh, the men are equally as affected as the women, because of course they are not. But I say it to say that there's a reason why the suicide rate amongst European expats in what's the name of that city I'm looking for in Thailand, the capital city of Thailand. Yeah, it's huge that the suicide rate amongst the men is off the scale. And the reason for that is that when your life is so empty, when you're so spiritually malnourished, when you spend large chunks of your life abusing and violating and raping and assaulting other people, you become so spiritually depleted, like you're half starved in that sense. So it's little wonder that a lot of them, you know, are just sick mentally and emotionally. So I say all that to say that this is a social toxin. It's a very, very toxic thing for humanity as a whole.
Something that I picked up on what you said earlier, you said dismantling a monster, and it made me think we're deconstructing absolutely everything these days. These academics you were talking about, deconstructing womanhood, deconstructing everything, but we can't deconstruct pornography. It's very interesting. We can only transform it, reform it. And spiritually malnourished is an expression that I'm adding to my vocabulary. Final question, I think. We only have 10 minutes left. So from the audience, it's the following. So given how girls are bombarded by these messages, encouraging them to be more and more sexual, do you think that young women should be introduced to the depravity of the world of men earlier for their own safety, or should they maintain their innocence, so to speak, and or their cognitive dissonance for as long as possible, or forever if they're lucky enough to never meet with the darker side of life?
If it were possible for women to maintain our innocence forever, there'd be no need for this conversation or any conversation I've ever had in the last 10 years. You know, it's not possible, of course. It's a funny question. It's the kind of question that I think it would be better suited for a kind of a sci-fi feminism, you know, like if we could imagine our way out of what's happening to us. The reality is that women don't get to choose. You know, we don't get to choose. Not in the society that we're living in, which is, of course, why we're busy setting about the business of changing it. Would it be better if we could? I'm not sure how to answer that. We'd only be brutally disabused of it, as so many of us were. I mean, I was 9 years old the first time a man told me he wanted to take me to bed. I was 10 the second time I got a similar message, and that one was physical. And so was this, you know, the following year at 11. And so on and so forth. And when I hit 14 and my breast started to develop, that's when the whole thing just exploded. And I was very unfortunate to have been made homeless the same year. So there was that double vulnerability. The way that a lot of adult men behave, you know, when they find themselves come running across a homeless 14-year-old girl with all of her obvious vulnerabilities and her developing body is, it's sick enough that it's shocking even to some men. You know, I've discussed this with men who just were aghast at the fact, you know, that you wouldn't have a day's peace in that situation. You just wouldn't. I mean, I, to this day at 45, will not sit into the front of a taxi because as a 14-year-old, when I was homeless, a taxi driver pulled up beside me offered me a lift. I told him I'd no money to pay him. He told me to get in anyway, and he tried to sexually assault me in the front of his car. But I was a feisty little thing, and I had a mouth on me, and I started shouting and told him to stop the car, and he did, and I got out. I don't sit in the front of taxis anymore, you know, because, well, you're rendered vulnerable. And in a world where you can't even sit beside a man who's driving for a living. And here in Dublin, I mean, I know we're pushed for time, so I'll shut up now in a minute. We still have this absolutely twisted system. I don't know if it's as bad in France. You'd have to tell me about that. But we had a man over here who was sexually assaulting women in his car. And he was ordered by the court to have women sitting in the back of his car going forward. Women weren't allowed to sit in the front of his car. So women were still perfectly legally allowed to sit into his car. He was still perfectly legally allowed to drive them. But this is what we're up against here, like in our courts. We had a woman's underwear held up in public a year or two back in an Irish court in a rape case. You know, things are still very, very backward here when it comes to the way that women are treated in the judicial system.
Oh, don't worry, it's not better here at all. I mean, or maybe you should worry. It's not the way to put it. I think maybe, Ursula, if you have anything else you wanted to add to wrap up, or other questions or anything.
I mean, yeah, I think we've covered pretty much everything we had to say about the book. So we talked about pornography as well. I don't know. I think if there's any question left in the chat or not. We don't have any questions left in the chat, maybe.
I think we're done. I think, yeah, I think. Well, if you have maybe, yeah.
Oh yeah, just maybe one question that's interesting about the translation of the title, because in French it's translated to l'enfer des passes, passe meaning trick, so it's hell of the tricks basically, and in English the title originally was paid for. How does that, yeah.
In Italian I think it's so it's paid rape. And then it's interesting because the subtitles change as well. So it's the truth about prostitution. In English, it's my journey through prostitution. And in French, it's my experience of prostitution. So there's like 3 different books almost. Which one is the most accurate? Which one do you prefer? And maybe in other languages as well. I don't know about them.
Well, because I'm not bilingual, this is where I'm really on the back foot when it comes to the translations. There's a huge amount of trust involved. I would never, for example, work with anybody who didn't understand the politics of the issue, because then I would be completely wide open and vulnerable, and I don't know what they would do with my language. And I'm sure that probably 9 times out of 10, they wouldn't even mean to misrepresent. It's just that if you don't understand the politics, you will make mistakes. And the connotations of words, I've always believed they're every bit as important as their dictionary definitions. So all of that is very important to me. But when it came to finding new titles in different languages, Paid For just simply didn't work in the French. It didn't have the same connotation as the English. I would have used Paid For everywhere and anywhere, had the connotation worked, but it just didn't in a lot of places. It was the same in Germany. Originally, the title Paid For came about by way of a bit of a temper moment on my part, because I'd originally wanted to call it The Prostitution Experience and have the subtitle The Commercialization of Sexual Abuse. But the distributors here in Dublin, who have as much clout as the publishers, I don't know if it's the same elsewhere, but here in Ireland, the distributors are mightily powerful because most of the books in the country, about 55 or 60% of the books on the island are sold through the one distributor. So that gives them a lot of leverage. And they just really didn't like either the title or the subtitle because it was not commercial enough. It was too academic and all of this. So I just kind of got a bit annoyed and I just went, oh, well, paid for, call it paid for then. That's what it is, isn't it? And the publisher said, oh, my, that's brilliant. And you really like it. That's where the title came from. I think that I absolutely understand the politics behind the paid rate title in Italian, but I also feel that we need to stretch the language further than that, because the problem with the term paid rape, certainly in English, is that people do not accept the definition of rape as anything but sex which is not compensated in any way, shape, or form. And that's exactly the reason why we've got so much mayhem going on in our judicial system. But this is a whole other conversation. It's much more it's much deeper and more involved. But I think that some language, while it's understandable, it's not as useful as some other language. Some people will dismiss like paid rape out of hand because to them it's nonsensical, you know, and you can spend as many hours or as many pages as you want trying to get that message across. And I'm not sure if paid rape has exactly the same connotation in Italian as it would have in English, because this comes back to, as I was saying, I'm not able to hear language in its own original connotation, which is very frustrating because I love language and I'd love to be multilingual. Maybe someday you can teach me some French anyway next week when I see you all.
We'll have a collective lesson, I think. Just something very practical. Do you have a website where we can see your book tour, where people can follow?
If you have a look at, I'm sure you'll see some stuff on the Moran Foundation cells, on the publisher's editions Libra. I haven't checked them out yet. I don't think the full scope of the tour is published anywhere, but those three areas, yeah, Moran Foundation cell and CAP are involved also in the tour.
And I think Osez le Féminisme will keep everyone posted as well. So thank you so much for your time. You have lots of people in the audience thanking you, and it was a pleasure and an honor. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. So we're going to as well see you at the event on the 15th that Mouvement d'Uni is organizing. So I'm going to tell the audience about that. Donc le 15 novembre, il y a un événement qui sera cette fois-ci en physique à Paris, organisé par le Mouvement d'Uni, Osez le Féminisme, CAP International, toutes les associations qu'a mentionné Rachel. Et donc là, vous pourrez avoir la présentation du livre en live avec, pareil, des questions-réponses à Rachel dans ce lieu à Paris. Il ne reste pas beaucoup de place. Vous pouvez trouver l'événement sur notre page Facebook dans événements, sur la page Facebook événements, et voilà, il suffit de suivre le lien pour s'inscrire. Donc il reste quelques places, donc dépêchez-vous si vous voulez être là le 15 en soirée pour la présentation du livre et de l'expertise de Rachel Moran également. Merci beaucoup d'avoir participé au webinaire, à la masterclass. Merci beaucoup et à la prochaine. Du coup, on se retrouve en tout cas tout le long du mois de novembre pour continuer la lutte